session the whole day?
Yeah, I hope so. Well, actually, I saw your slides and I'm really looking forward to it.
Nice, that's nice. Me too, looking forward. Yeah,
Looking forward. We'll be starting very soon.
sure, thanks.
Start at 3 o'clock sharp, Bangkok time. So I guess it's good time for us to start now. So welcome everyone to session number 2 of the ASEAN BCG Researcher Development Program on managing your research career. So you'll see some of the rules here. It remains the same since the first session. That please rename yourself with the country code, your name and your surname. Keep your video camera on, but your microphone muted. So it's a little bit complicated. So we can see you, but we don't want to hear what's happening on your side. And then at the end of the workshop, we'll have short exercise related to an attendee engagement. So today we have 2 talks. So the short exercise will pop up right after the talk. So you have two exercises today. If you need any help, you can just email straightly to aseanbcg@nasda.or.th. So today, as I said, we'll have 2 talks, and it's about managing your research skill. So it will be like a 2-hour session, and I'm really looking forward to it. So our first speaker is from Singapore, Dr.Kamaladasan, Kalidasan. He is a president of the ASAR postdoc Early Career Scientist Society. And our second speaker is Dr. Jewellord named Singh, or Dr. Jojo. He's from International Development International Institute of Social Studies in The Hague, Erasmus University, Rotterdam, from the Netherlands. So just to touch a little bit, because, well, I think you have been seeing this for several times, I mean, for the participants, but it's good to remind you that the program will have 2 phases. And this is the first phase, which is online. So you have like several online lectures. And in phase 2, so we'll be selecting 30 researchers from the first phase to participate on-site in Thailand. Well, it will be a 5-day workshop. And then for this on-site workshop, it is planned to be held from 10 to 14 July 2023. So the selection process will be like this. So once all the lectures are done, so we will just go through all those who attended the session, and also you'll be requested to submit your profile CV and also a short expose of around like 500 words explaining how your research connects with BCG or bio, circular, and green economy, and addresses both national and ASEAN priorities. So the selection result will be announced by the beginning of June 2023. So this is actually the outline of our first phase, and now we are on the 4th lecture on session 2 about management of your research career. So we'll have 2 talks, and the talk will not be so long. It will just be like 25 minutes or 30 minutes. Followed by a 15-minute Q&A. So we have already received some questions from our speakers. And then after that, during that Q&A session, so you'll be asked to do that quiz that we've got from the speakers. And also, if you have any question, you can ask them as well. So when you ask the question, as I said, I want you to have your mic muted. So what will happen is that you put your question in the chat box. So you can just start putting your question during the talk. But please make sure that you are sending your question to everyone, not only to me, myself, because we also have our team to help screening the question. Because based on our experience, we will be receiving like lots of questions. And not all of them, unfortunately, will be answered. But we will make sure that we send all these questions to our speakers so that you'll get some reply from them. So without further ado, I think I'll stop sharing. And then I will go with our first speaker. Before I start, I ask him to start sharing his screen. I would like to introduce him a bit so that you all know why we decided to invite him to guide you to see how you need to manage your research career. So I would like to invite Dr. Kalidasan. So he's a research fellow of ASAR in Singapore. So besides his energetic experiences in the research field, he also has several experiences as an academic mentor at the ASAR MOE Scientist in School program. Dr. Kamaladasan currently is the president of the ASAR Postdoc Early Career Scientist Society, which has been a key actor in the organization of the Singapore National Postdoc Symposium and provides career development support to its member. So without further ado, Dr. Kamaladasan, so the floor is yours.
Thank you so much for having me here. So let me just go on to the presentation mode. All right, so thank you so much for the wonderful introduction. So today I'm here to give a talk about managing a research career. And as previously mentioned, my name is Kalidasan. I'm actually currently the president for the A-Star Postdoc and Early Career Scientist Society within A-Star, which is actually the agency for science, technology, and research that works within Singapore. So I'm very pleased that I've been given this opportunity to share about how one could actually manage your research career. So without much further ado, let me go into what we would probably be covering for today. So I think one of the most important key things to cover today is to look at, to even have a successful career, to even manage it very well, I think it's very important to have great motivations. And so I'll be covering what sort of motivations and attributes a successful researcher should have. And of course, throughout our research careers, relationships are very important, right? So the student and supervisor relationships are very important. And in addition, some of us might even have secondary supervisors, maybe from a different institute, different university. So the mentor and the second supervisor relationships should also be discussed. They will be discussed. And of course, the challenges that students or even postdoctoral researchers would face during this entire phase of their career will also be discussed. And how do we really go about getting across these challenges? How do we navigate across these challenges? What do we really need to do? We would have to actually do a very good thorough career planning. So we'll be discussing some points on that. Beyond a career in research, what do you really look out for? So we've really got to be like scanning our horizon beyond research, because the lifetime or lifespan of a researcher I feel is relatively short unless you keep going up further in the career. And lastly, we'll also have to look at work-life balance and external pressures, because work-life balance is a very important aspect for researchers, because most of us, or maybe all of us, are expected to be at it 24/7. Sometimes the relationships with our supervisors demands that sort of a fervor in research. We've got to be at it 24/7. So sometimes we've got to have some work-life balance in order to have a controlled stress environment so that we can perform much better in our entire career. So these are the segments that I'll be covering throughout these sessions. Now, let's look at the kind of motivation and attributes that a successful researcher has. So first of all, before you step into research or picking a career in research, you should first ask yourself, why are you interested in pursuing a career in research? I think that's the most important question, because it's like an ocean, you see. You've got various disciplines, and even within individual disciplines, you've got subtopics that could be really very deep, and the breadth is also going to be very long. So you have to be really be very interested and to also have this sort of conviction in order to pursue a career in research. So you have to really ask this question. And why are you undertaking this research? That's a very important question. That's because, as I said earlier, there are too many disciplines, and even within each discipline, you've got too many subtopics. Perhaps you are more interested towards a certain subtopic. For example, let's say I want to study cancer, because perhaps one of my family members was afflicted with cancer. So I take a certain affinity towards studying that. But sometimes you may not get the opportunity to do cancer research. Perhaps you might be, the only choice you'll be getting is to do wound healing research, for example, skin biology. That's another field altogether. So you have to ask yourself, why are you undertaking this research? And you have to look at where it matches your interests. And you should also have a very good sensing whether you would entirely like this field that you step into. So all these things would actually determine how interested you will be throughout the lifespan of your career. And it could be a very strong predictor of how well you will do in that field of research. Okay, so next, of course, a good researcher or a very interested researcher has to be very passionate about career. Of course, resilience is a very important characteristic, because I think most of us would know that in research, let's say if you were to perform 10 experiments, perhaps 8 of them may not be successful. Maybe one would give you some results, another one would give you positive results. And so you have to keep your mind together, you have to keep your spirit together, and you have to be very resilient to go on and pursue and understand what your experiment is telling you so that you take the wise next step. Nextly, you've got to be detail-oriented, but yet very visionary. So sometimes people get too detail-oriented that they actually kind of forget what's happening around them, and they forget the bigger picture. Some of them, they just have the bigger picture in mind, and then they forget the very little details that would make up the entire story of their research. So I think you've got to have a balance of both of these two worlds. Perhaps as one becomes a PI, they tend to become a visionary because they are further away from the bench and they think about translating their work to the patient or to the bedside. So I think that's very important to have a very good balance between these two pools of thoughts. You got to have a very creative mind in order to think out of the box as well. That's because, I mean, in research, there's been tons of work that's been done by others. So we've constantly need to be looking for the game changer, the new avenue, the new road that would help you differentiate yourself amongst those who are there before you. And what makes everything work is to be determined. You've got to be determined. You've got to have a very solid plan, stick to it, sometimes make some adjustments, but you've got to be determined to carry it out from start to finish. Of course, you've got to be knowledgeable as you go through the entire process. You learn to read more and you become an expert. You are very well versed in the field and you also know who are your competitors as well. So now when you think about competition, you also learn to become a team player because there are lots of people out there who are competing against you, and then you would have to have a chance to be able to pick your own collaborators as well. And it is in those circumstances that you would learn to become a great team player, so that your research would gain greater recognition and more visibility. And as I said earlier, many experiments could go wrong. And so you've got to be highly resilient and you've got to be very self-motivated as well. You've got to be a very self-started person in order to have a very strong career in research. And of course, just doing plain research doesn't work. You have to be able to effectively communicate it to the audience out there, because the audience may be a stakeholder, a business development person. Let's say if you're trying to translate your findings to the hospital, so the audience on the other side might be a hospital person, need not necessarily be a scientific person like a doctor. It could be a business development manager. You might want to even, patients could be another audience as well. So you have to be a very effective communicator to be able to cater to all of these different groups of people. And as I said earlier, creativity is very important, the capability of thinking outside the box. Okay, so now let's look at the student-supervisor relationships. Okay, so this is a very important aspect of every researcher because I believe that your PhD supervisor, basically where you had gotten your PhD degree, actually you've got to have a very good relationship with that person because they sort of determine the trajectory of your career. Because let's say when you go on to apply for grants much later in life and you need references, so this is the person that you probably fall back on. So this is a very important aspect when you're looking at a career in science. So let's say we are looking at a doctoral researcher. There are certain demands that a department poses onto the doctoral researcher in terms of KPIs, key performance index, like the number of papers you're publishing, the number of, for example, technology disclosures, patents, and so on and so forth. Then there's, of course, the expectation required by the discipline. For example, perhaps if you're working in biology, you have different sort of expectations compared to when you are in engineering. Okay, and if you're able to integrate these expectations together and be able to maintain a very high level of academic output, that's when you've been successfully been able to integrate these two subsets of expectations, and this would be a very good predictor of your success in science. So the issue is there could be actually lots of problem areas, right? There could be lots of mismatches, especially between you and your supervisor. For example, the working styles may not fit. Your supervisor might be a little bit more laid back, and you would actually be requiring much more sort of guidance from your PI. However, it may not be there, or sometimes it may be the other way around. You wouldn't want any interference. However, your PI might actually be giving you lots of extra work to do, will be micromanaging you. So all these things results in lack of confidence in the student or the postdoctoral researcher. Sometimes the person can become very marginalized from the work that they are going to be doing. So that's one of the problem areas. Another thing is the problem area could be with the department itself. For example, the expectations between doctoral researchers, students, as well as the department. A classic example of this is that the student or the doctoral researcher could be academically underprepared and may not have a very clear idea of what has to be done in order to meet the expectations of the department. So in these kind of cases, you would have a poor mismatch between the department and as well as the doctoral researcher. And this would also result in the researcher being isolated from the departmental community. So how do you really get around this? Is, of course, you've got to be able to discuss more, talk more to your department friends, and you should also talk more to the PIs who are not within your realm of science or who are also managing different disciplines, so that you establish your departmental reputation as well. And next, sometimes students or doctoral researchers, along the way, they may lose some interest and they may think that research faculty life is not really the thing for them. And it may not be aligned with personal goals, because personal goals may change due to life circumstances. And so the student may think that the job market is probably poor, and may not meet the person's, the students or the doctoral researchers' expectation. So this is when the student becomes demotivated. And again, you see all these problems cropping up. So you would understand that there are so many problems that could actually crop up, and there are responsibilities that your supervisor should also be having. And you should also have certain sort of responsibilities to ensure that both of you do not run into such problems, and so that you could have a smooth research career. So what are those? Working with your supervisors, how would you describe your supervisor's personality and your way of supervising? So for example, if I were to have a wonderful relationship with my supervisor, you should be able to understand your supervisor's personality and their supervising style. So how would you go about describing your personality and your preferred way of working? So the idea is to understand your supervisor's personality and the style of supervising, and as well as understanding your own personality and understanding how would you prefer to work. And as a person, you should be able to exercise due diligence and sort of compare and contrast against these two styles of working and understand whether would you end up in conflict or do you rather have a wonderful journey together as a mentor and as a student. So here I've actually presented a model for the different kinds of interactions that happens between supervisors and researchers. So one of which is the dominant supervisor. Okay, for example, would not work very well with a very self-motivated student who wants minimum interference. On the other hand, a very independent supervisor who believes the student has to take full onus and full responsibility of the project. They may not pair well with a student who actually needs direction. All right. So the best case scenario relationships are what I've highlighted here in the solid green lines. For example, the interactive supervisor who actually gives in and takes in discussions to agree, enjoys an interaction with the researcher themselves. And of course, the dominant supervisor would probably pair well with a student or a doctoral researcher who's willing to have lots of direction from the supervisor. So I need you to take this with you so that you would understand the different personality types and the supervising styles. And I hope that you would understand this, you would take this in your future and also pick your projects wisely and supervisors wisely as well. Next, there's this concept of second supervisors or co-supervisors or secondary supervisors. What is the role of your second supervisor and what is the role of your mentor? So you would have to understand that your second supervisor or your co-supervisor will always be doing a co-work with your original mentor or your original supervisor. So part of the work that's being done by your project would come from your secondary supervisors or the students who are working under the secondary supervisor. So what happens here is that you have to have a very good relationship with your secondary supervisor and ensure that they are completely complementary to what you do. So these secondary supervisors are actually mentors who are leading scientists themselves with a complementary academic expertise to you. For example, let's say if I'm doing wound healing work research, and let's say I'm looking at a drug, studying the efficacy of a drug to see whether wound closure is being promoted. A very good example of a complementary academic expertise would be the one who would be able to formulate your drugs into a certain formulation so that you can translate it from the bench to the bedside. So that's an example of a complementary academic expertise. And this mentor would be able to give you novel insights, gives you alternative view on a research project, and hopefully you find the relationship very fruitful and it develops over time as you gain more experience with one another. So the idea here is that you would also be able to learn from him and thereby also be able to go out there and sort of like apply for your own grants. However, the onus is on the student or the doctoral researcher. They've got to be very proactive. The mentors are generally very busy academics, so they have their own timetables and their busy schedules to manage. So sometimes you would have to put in a little bit more effort to sort of develop the relationship and to also learn so much more from them. So there's this quote that I came across quite recently when I was reading a book. It is actually very crucial during your training that you develop confidence in your insight. What I mean by insight is like your ideas and learn to think independently of your mentor. Why do I say that? It's because your mentor is already an expert in a particular subject. And definitely, if you want to be very successful in science, you would have to have your own original research, which is why you would have to think of an idea that's independent of what your mentor has done. Okay, so the outcome of the perfect training experience is that you leave the laboratory thinking that your mentor is a good person. mean to say that you would think that your mentor is a good person because probably he has trained you in a very nice way. You've had this wonderful experience with him, and he or she would be a go-to person for you, so that your trajectory of your research career would continuously progress to greater heights. Now, there are certain challenges for scientists that could actually hamper their career growth. And this could happen at any type of the career, any stage of the career. So the main thing that happens is lack of interest. You may feel that you're losing interest in whatever you are studying. Okay, so in the early career, lots of scientists actually start off with a great confidence, and they want to perform as well as possible, and they wouldn't want to prove anybody wrong. Sometimes experiments fail, or certain relationships do not work out too well, and hence you could actually develop an imposter syndrome, whereby actually you don't feel that you're doing enough to exhibit your expertise. So you feel like you want to push yourself harder and harder, but you feel like you are never doing enough, no matter how well you do. So that could really happen. And lack of confidence could also happen because you keep trying something again and you're not given positive reinforcement throughout your career. And you might also feel that you lack the knowledge in this particular area of research. And perhaps due to the relationships with your supervisors, or even your lab mates, your working environment, you might feel constrained. Especially when you have a very dominant supervisor. And so these are certain things that could happen within your early career. And along your career, let's say you've gone up to a much more mature state, you might feel that, hey, look, I've exhausted the area so much. I've looked at so many different aspects of it, and you've really got nothing else to look at. And so you think that, hey, I've lost interest about it. And the problem could be that sometimes you studied the depth of the problem, that you can't see the breadth of the problem. You can't see over the side. You can't see what else to look out for. So then again, you might feel constrained because you feel that you've exhausted everything. But however, I think the humbling moment for every scientist, I think every scientist should feel that there is nothing that is too deep, and there's nothing that is too wide for you to explore. There's tons of things out there left to be explored. I think that's one thing that you should always keep in your mind to keep yourself motivated. So how should you really go about this? I think you should really sort of take a step back, read all the different articles in your field, especially the recent ones. I'm very sure someone would actually add some value to it, and then try to have a feeling of where you are in this area of this field. Especially against the backdrop of all these recent articles, because these recent articles could actually fuel your thinking. They could actually tell you, hey, yeah, why didn't I try that? Hey, I tried that, but actually didn't sort of pursue that. So please step back and take a break and have a look at all of these as well. Sometimes we just keep doing experiments and we could lose sight of what's going on around us. And sometimes we get lots of rejection, especially, let's say, if we are submitting papers, if we are submitting technology disclosures, if you've been applying for grants, we sometimes get rejected. And it may be a bad thing because we may not secure funding and so on and so forth. But please, I guess we should avoid taking it personally. And generally, these processes come with feedback by a review panel. So we have to take the feedback very constructively and get back to the drawing board and work as how we've been working before, but with a newer idea or a newer modus operandi. So you have got to know that you are not alone. There are lots of others who are also coping with rejection. So please feel free to share with others, talk to your friends, talk to your collaborators, and I'm very sure things will work out pretty well. So talking about collaboration. Okay, so that's another way to get around this and make yourself feel very differentiated from the rest of the cohort or your competitors. You have to understand that teamwork is how you make a dream work. So if you have a very good team, you have to build a team that's very complementary to you. And so you've got to be very clear of what part you play in team. And you must understand what other parts are required for success. So let's say if I'm applying for a grant, And let's say I'm a biologist, I'm a skin biologist. I need, let's say if I'm studying scarring and I want to formulate my drug, maybe I need a formulation scientist over there. And I need different sort of expertise in my entire team in order to be able to be very successful for the grant. So you have to understand what are the parts that are required. So we have to be able to anticipate certain problems and how they can be addressed. So usually, I mean, if you have a very close friend or if you have a very close colleague, you could discuss in pairs. And of course, you could share it with the rest of your group, the collaborators group, and then come up with the relevant solutions. So of course, the next thing to do or something that you should always be doing is to be able to charter your own career plan. So how do you go about doing that? As I said previously, science, researchers' timeline is a rather very short timeline, whereby you'll be able to come up with very productive work. So you would have to understand your career timeline. What are your aspirations? Let's say I want to be able to publish this work like within 2 years. Or let's say I want to become a PI for by my 5th year or by my 10th year. So you should be able to come up with a career timeline for yourself and balance them up with your aspirations and have very clear timelines as to when do you hope to achieve them. And of course, beyond research or even within research, you should always have the mindset to scan the horizon. You may never know what's good that's going to be coming. So what are the other opportunities that may be developing in your area? So you may be strictly a bench scientist. Okay, however, you could also take up positions like business development management or even sales for that matter that are very related within your area of expertise. And of course, how do you increase your awareness of possible opportunities? I would say that you would have to constantly attend talks, talk more to your colleagues, look at different people from different backgrounds, study their movements, study what are the other opportunities out there. And also, you've got to also understand what you're really interested in, because what you're really interested in would really sort of make you more aware of where do you want to go next, beyond research or within the realms of research. And then next, you think about how can you sort of improve your chances. I mean, to say, how do you build your resume? What would you do? So let's say if I'm very interested in mass spectrometry, and I know the machine inside out, and let's say I'm very interested in sales, how can I improve my chances? I would actually be sort of like taking up or volunteering, teaching mass spectrometry within my institute, building a reputation for myself about how well I teach mass spectrometry, and that sort of experience could actually very well be very aligned with what move you're going to make next. So, of course, AI, it's a beautiful mind. That's the hot topic right now. Everyone is trying to look at AI. So we understand that that is a booming place right now. We know that machine learning is no longer limited to calculating permutations. Actually, machine learning AI can do much more than that. Quite recently, we've had lots of news pertaining to ChatGPT and stuff like that, lots of AI algorithms going on. So AI could be a new venture that you could be thinking of as well. We could pick up coding, computational science as well, which is very much related to bioinformatics as well. So feel free and to go for courses, self-improvement as well, to pick up newer skills, to keep yourself very relevant, especially it could be either very pertaining to your current field or may not be pertaining to your current field. But however, I guess as scientists or people being in the research field, we use the same set of skills. We draw on the same set of skills to stay relevant to the latest things, right? Because we read papers, look for the latest news, for the latest findings. So we have to keep ourselves abreast of the latest technology and keep ourselves updated with knowledge and go with the flow as well. So, of course, work-life balance is very important. That keeps us very grounded. Okay, so it's very important to maintain your mental health, especially research environment. It could be an environment whereby you are stimulated to think 24/7 and to think about your biological problems or your engineering problems, physical problems that your PI has given you, the research questions, I mean. So you might have to maintain your mental health, take the time to reduce stress, control stress as and when. Of course, you should also ensure your physical health and well-being, because all of these increases your productivity. And by doing so, you actually become more rounded individual. And of course, you've only got one life. So yes, live life to the fullest. So technically what we've covered today is what are the qualities you look out for in a successful scientist, and what you should have to be successful, right? You've got to have resilience, creativity, and probably be a team player when you're a collaborator. And we've looked at the student and supervisor relationship, how these relationships could actually sort of like affect the trajectory of your career, and perhaps how we could best manage this. Next, we also looked at the challenges of scientists. We considered some of the challenges that could happen in academic research, I mean to say like loss of interest. So we've always got to have this concept of generating ideas, need to have a behavior of generating ideas and managing rejection, right? And lastly, we'll also look at career planning. What sort of moves we could probably make in order to drive our careers further, how else we can pivot across different areas of research or even beyond research, and so on and so forth. So with that, I'd like to conclude, and I hope that there are key takeaways. You've been learning a couple of things over here. And once again, I'd like to take this time to thank you for this wonderful opportunity for presenting. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kamaladasan. I think there are a lot of things that really we have learned from this really short lecture, but very fruitful. So until now, I've seen no questions yet. So well, I know that like for ASEAN, our ASEAN culture, it's sometimes difficult, I mean, to be the first one. So I'll be the first one. So my question is that, well, I see there are, well, different types of mentors, I mean, of supervisors, and also different types of us, right? So if there are mismatches, I mean, sometimes it's very difficult for you to really manage it. So I think that like, well, the best choice is actually to quit or to find someone else who really will match you well. But for example, if you are bonded by scholarship and you can't do that, so are there any advices from you to deal with that kind of situations?
Yes, sometimes these could be an issue, and it's a real problem, of course. So transparency is the best solution in this. Honesty and transparency. That no matter how difficult a supervisor is, or how mismatched a student or postdoctoral researcher has been matched with a supervisor, I think there's always a need to sit down and really talk to the supervisor. And of course, it's very important to communicate your ideas and as well as communicate your own decisions. For example, let's say you're bonded in a scholarship. I think it is fair to say that you can actually have a very honest conversation with your supervisor and say that I'm not sure where this could be going. This is what I have in mind. Where do you think this is going in mind? And I think both of them could actually come to a consensus. And once you establish that consensus, I think it's very easy to make the next move, rather than exchanging very negative vibes and then burning the bridges forever. You know, that's not an option here.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, getting to understand each other would be actually the better way out.
Exactly, that's right.
I agree. Well, I think I got one really interesting question here. So currently, research grants typically encourage us to work across disciplines, or for example, with the community. So it's not really only a relationship with your supervisor or with your mentors, but also with, for example, non-researchers, with the community. So the question is that how we manage these relationships with different types of researchers or non-researchers.
So I think relationship managing is a skill on its own. So communication is very key. So meaning to say that Because, for example, in my line of work, I tend to talk with multiple stakeholders as well. These includes business people because they come with a very business mindset when they are trying to translate your bench work, and so you have to speak in a language that sort of that is understandable for them. So I think the key here is to be able to really understand. To first of all, we have to really observe what they are keen on, what are their focus areas, and then we sort of keep their focus areas in our mind and sort of address them as we talk to them. And this way they would be able to listen to you more clearly, because most of the problem happens because no one is listening to no one well, and that's because no one is speaking the same language. So that's how it happens.
Agree. I mean, like language and also listening to others would be like the key takeaways here, I guess.
Exactly.
Another one, also, I think this is very typical problem that we may face. What can we do if your mentor, supervisor, or a busy professor or have no time for you?
Well, that's a famous question. It happens all the time. So yes, the professor can be very busy. So the best solution for this, as far as I've seen, is to usually send critical updates to them, because I think in research, the onus is always going to be on the postdoctoral researcher or the student. I don't think no one is ever going to say that the supervisor is going to be in the wrong. Mostly the onus is on the postdoctoral researcher. So the best way to go about this is to be able to identify what your supervisor is very interested in, perhaps key results that the supervisor is looking out for. Maybe you're missing out those things. Identify those things. You may not even be able to schedule a meeting, but keep sending your updates. And whenever the chance comes, please feel free to talk in the language that he understands, he or she understands. Try not to do extra things that may not be aligned with your supervisor. So alignment is very key. With alignment, the other party would want to listen to you, and you would also be able to get your time to discuss the other party. So alignment is very key, and the language is very key. Yes.
I see. Yeah, I mean, like, well, if we keep him or her updated, so I mean, if he see that it still aligns with his interest or aligns with what he is going to do, then it should be fine.
It
Sometimes,
should
like,
be fine.
I mean, no news is good news, right?
Sometimes, yes. That's right.
Yeah. Okay. The next question will be well, all right, there are really a lot of questions here.
Yeah, seems like it.
So what a good platform where early researchers, I mean, early career researchers can learn new skills in a practical way. So I think like there are a lot of platforms out there, right? So do you recommend any of them?
Okay, so first of all, before we go on to platforms, if you were to look at within your organizations, I suggest looking inwards first. For example, where I come from, the A-Star Postdoc Early Career Scientist Society, we are a society, okay, within the organization, and we focus on how we could actually sort of improve the lives of the early career researchers. We sort of organize lots of talks, or these things, we call it fireside chats. Sometimes we get different careers, sort of different kind of staff within the organization at different career levels to give talks, so that your careers, your early career scientists would have knowledge of the kind of different career pathways that you have within an organization. Because in a bigger organization, you would have multiple career pathways, not just the research scientist pathways. You may have different things as well. So I would suggest you would have to look internally first. Even if you do not have a society, I would suggest that postdocs or scientific staff, could be research assistants or research officers, they could come in together, form a society, so that more people could come to hear about what you're trying to talk about, the issues that you're trying to raise, and from there you can gain traction and do lots more from there.
Okay, I think that's also a very nice answer. Thank you very much.
Worries, yeah.
Another one, again about dealing with people. How to deal with seniority. So sometimes our working place is so hierarchical,
Mhm.
and younger staff needs to face seniority. So how we deal with it?
So we only have to face seniority with politeness and with tactfulness. There are no second thoughts about that. So sometimes it could be this thing called a generation gap. You know, the younger generation might be a little bit less tactful or maybe more direct in the way they approach. And with every generation, even a 5-year gap would seem like a 10-year or 15-year gap. Especially, I think in the recent years. So I think we have to always maintain a very professional, polite way of approaching anyone for that matter, because everybody deserves respect. We can't afford to be very direct to anyone for that matter. So I think being professional, courteous, being polite, and to be able to put across our points in a very organized fashion. Because even when we talk to senior management, time is a very important factor, and they would want to listen to things or look at things in a very few sentences. If you want to summarize a problem, they will only have a few minutes to look at it and understand it. So sometimes being concise, being polite is the way to go. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's also one of the ways that I used to deal with it. I mean, I myself is also not so senior, so
Okay.
respect and also politeness
Yes.
would
And
be something that is,
conciseness. Yes.
yeah, and conciseness. So
Yes.
these three things are actually very, very important.
Mm.
Um, so the next one, so he or she said that I find it hard to keep up with the career's KPI. So like
Mm.
people are keeping on talking about these KPIs, right? And stay
Yes.
passionate with the research at the same time, as the KPI requirement doesn't really align with my passion. Any
Mhm.
advice?
So yes, sometimes KPIs may not be aligned with your interests. Uh, so of course, the best case scenario is you're using your KPIs to fulfill your interests. If your KPIs are not aligned with your interests, then of course you've got to put in the extra hours to fulfill the KPIs first, because your funding mechanisms could be as such. Your funding may be dependent on those KPIs. Only if you meet those KPIs, then perhaps an industry player might fund your research, and you could keep your job, sort of thing. So you would have to definitely prioritize your KPIs, and your interest would have to go, means that you have to go the extra mile to actually show that, hey, I've done this extra thing, and I think it could be aligned. It may not be aligned, but I think it's something extra, another area that we could probably look at. But yeah, definitely the emphasis should be on KPIs. Definitely, there are no two ways about that in that sense. Yes.
Well, the next one, well, it might be a bit personal, but I think it's also good to learn from your experience. So why did you select research career, and what's your aspiration?
Okay, so it's quite a flashback, really. So this happened during my undergrad studies. I met a very wonderful supervisor who actually guided me so well, and he became my role model, and I wanted to be like him. So I decided to walk the pathway that he walked. So that was a huge inspiration. That was why I decided to research. And I found it very interesting to work with lots of unknowns, because you're trying to discover things that have not been discovered before. So that was a huge adventure. I found that very adventurous for me. So that was a huge motivation for me.
Great. Well, still there are a lot of questions here, but I think with a matter of time, I need to go with this one as a last one.
Okay.
So seems like early career researchers and mid-career researchers have different issues.
Mm-hmm.
So what are potential challenges for mid-career researchers that we should prepare to get advanced in our career?
Right. So I think for the mid-career researchers is changing priorities, definitely. When you're in a mid-career, you'd probably be settling down more in life. That's one of the major things I happen to see, because I'm in the midst of that situation as well, so I can understand. And career stability is a huge issue as well, because many of scientists could be on contracts, and many of these contracts could be funded based on how well we achieve KPIs. So these are all very linked, tightly linked. So the way we could go about this is to actually sort of like what I said earlier, we have to be very diligent about prioritizing our KPIs and able to also sort of like control our stress levels as well. We have to I think some of them could find solace in trying to teach or younger or teach or train younger researchers, and that could be a source of motivation. So these things could be one of the things that mid-career professionals could actually do in research. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much. Well, I think we really got a lot of good suggestions for the early career researchers to move further. Thank you very much again, Dr. Kamaladasan. I think I will then move to the next speakers here. So before that, actually, I realized that I didn't introduce myself. So I'm Kampanat Silva from National Energy Technology Center under National Science, Technology and Development Agency, or NASDA. And that's the reason that I was assigned to moderate this session. So I would like to then move to our next speaker, Dr. Jojo or Dr. Jewellord, named Singh. He's an assistant professor in international development at the International Institute of Social Studies in The Hague. It's a part of Erasmus University, Rotterdam. He has recently been appointed as a global fellow at the Wilson Center Environmental Change and Security Program and part of the expert roster at the WABA Institute for Strategic Cooperation. Additionally, he's an affiliate research fellow at the International Institute for Asian Study, or IIAS. And in 2020, the European Research Council starting grant was awarded to him for a 5-year research project, the Green Industry Policy in the Age of Rare Metals. Apart from these achievements, he held also 2 highly prestigious research fellowships, the Alexander von Humboldt Foundation Research Fellowship Award in 2017, and also the Japanese Society for the Promotion of Science, JSPS, at the University of Tokyo in 2016. So I think I've spent a lot to introduce you, because you really got a very, very, interesting profile. But without further ado, I think I would like to give the floor to Dr. Jojo to start your talk, please.
Thank you very much for the kind introduction. So I think part of the reason why I was here is because I've done a couple of talks for Eurasis ASEAN, which is the arm of the European Research Council, which is the main funder of the current project that I'm working on. But so usually I talk about rare metals and critical minerals. So it's actually not very common that I had to reflect a little bit in terms of what I've done in the past 7 to 10 years of my career. So this was quite an interesting process for me as well. So I'd like to thank the organizers for the invitation. So what I will do is basically to just give you an idea of how I crafted my trajectory as a researcher, how I moved from being a researcher to a research leader. And then I'll talk a little bit about some of the core issues I think that the other speaker has already mentioned, some of them at least, Dr. Kalidasan. And then some reflections also in terms of the main challenges for early careers. I thought that might be an interesting discussion point for us. So just in terms of who I am, so I'm based here in the Netherlands, but I have a Filipino nationality. My training is political science. I did my PhD at Sheffield University, but since my PhD, I've always had a more interdisciplinary outlook. So I'm currently working on a 5-year research program funded by the European Research Council. And so this is basically to set up a big research project with 3-4 researchers working under me. And before landing here in the Netherlands, I've always held tenure track positions, never finished them. And the reason behind that is because I've decided to move in to take research fellowships in between. So every time I was going to be close to the permanent contract, there was an opportunity to do a research only trajectory, and I've always chosen that, as opposed to just being a permanent staff in a department. So I think because of that, one of the main strengths that I've had over the past 7-8 years is that I've created this very global network. I'm extremely well connected in Europe, in US, and East Asia. And I think that's been a very important source for me to build big research projects. So to me, that was basically the trajectory that I wanted to really take. Okay, so let me just start by going to, I think it's really important as researchers to reflect in terms of what our motivations and ambitions are. I think one of the main questions, particularly for social scientists, is do I get an academic job or should I move on to the more practice side of the research? So it could be a policy job, a government job, civil service. It could be working for the United Nations or international organizations. And in some cases, working for international non-governmental organizations as well, or the NGO world. This, I think, is a really important decision because you have to make a choice whether you want to be in competition in the research career versus moving into more policy practice, where the career track would be very different. And it's a personal choice, I think. Ultimately, it's really about the circumstances you're in and what your interests are. So if you have decided you want to take an academic job, then I think there's also an important question that we never think about, which is, do I want to be one of those leading researchers, creating big projects and managing grants? Or am I comfortable working on my own as a sole researcher? And I think part of that conversation is how, in terms of the topic, how much do you need the grants in order for you to be able to conduct and be good at the research that you're doing. So in the sciences, one of the main limitations is that the funding is essential. Is that, like the money that I'm working on, for example, now I'm working on a 1.5 million grant. For social sciences, that's a huge amount of money. But whenever I speak to my friends in biochemistry, they're talking about 3-5 million grants, just buying one lab, setting up a laboratory. So again, it's a matter of scale, and it's a matter of thinking about what you need. What do you really need in terms of getting your research, good research done? And it's a really important point to make, to think about. In some instances, I also think that our personal circumstances matter more. And so the balance between how you look at your family situation and then how to achieve your career goals and the existing network that you have may be the main determinant for you to decide what kind of career track you want to take within the university. Looking back in terms of my personal choices, I think the most important question I've always asked is, am I going to be mobile enough to take advantage of opportunities? So, of course, one of the most important, one of the reasons why we always want a permanent position is job security, right? So we want to get a permanent job where we become an assistant professor, associate, and then a full professor in one university. That's the very traditional career track. But increasingly, because most of the opportunities are widely available for many people, if you're highly competitive, I think there's that question. If you ever get offered a job to move to Japan for 1 or 2 years, are you going to give up an existing job that you have that's comfortable? Because not all universities, not all departments will be happy to let you go for 2 years. So these are quite important choices to make. Your family circumstances would affect that decision-making. Can you bring everyone? So for example, there are specific fellowships that really cater to bring, to be able to bring for researchers to bring their whole family. So Japan Society for Promotion of Sciences, JSPS, the Alexander von Humboldt Foundation, the EU grants, they actually have specific funding allocation to help people bring their family when they move from one place to another. So mobility becomes an important question as well. But I think not everyone would be in a privileged position to do that. So we should also think about what are we willing to sacrifice in order to have better career opportunities. And finally, I think it's just good to think about how big your network is and think about how you think they are going to be useful in pursuing your career plans. Just to give you an idea, where I work is in the interface of policy and social sciences. So the project that I'm working on has a very strong public policy component. So part of my network building has always been reaching out to policymakers. So in my current project, I have a board of advisors where someone from the UN, the United Nations Research Institute for Social Development, UNRISD in Geneva, is a member of. I have someone from the Embassy of Brazil, someone from the Embassy of Kazakhstan involved in our project. So think about what your career plans are in the future and think about what kind of network do you need in order for you to get to the place where you want to go. So in terms of thinking about what your career plan should look like or ought to look like, there are certain things that in hindsight, I thought might be useful to consider. The first is to think about what are the structural barriers you personally face. So now that we have social media and Twitter, you always hear people complaining about the different problems that we have in the university system. And they're all true. But I think what's really important is to reflect on how each of these barriers are affecting you personally in making important choices for your career. So in some circumstances, for example, academic environment is a problem. So if you don't have a very supportive environment, or let's say you're a geographer, you're an environmental scientist, but then you're not in the right department. So academic environment makes a lot of a difference in terms of pushing you to be good at your research plans in achieving the research career that you want. In many instances, because academia is essentially, we are run, universities need to make money. So we have a lot of teaching responsibilities. We have a lot of management responsibilities in the department. Is it something that you personally would be happy to let go? Because then you need to make certain choices so that you can avoid them, or are you happy to take on these time-consuming responsibilities, knowing that there are going to be some consequences to the research career? And finally, I think it's just also good to know that there are also specific career obstacles. I work in the European context where it's very uncommon to find Southeast Asian academics established here. So one of the main challenges is always communicating my work to them, but also, as mentioned a while ago, the working style of someone from Asia is always going to be different from people working in Europe. There's also I don't want to overemphasize it, but there are structural racism that exists in academic institutions in Europe, and we should just be more forward and more upfront about it. So on a day-to-day basis, you may not feel that these are problems, but actually they do impede in terms of what you can do, what you can achieve as a researcher. So these are important barriers that you really need to consider whenever you formulate your own research plan and your career strategy. So one of the important things to note, I think, is although there are many opportunities that are widely available now, I always say that these are always highly competitive. So we need to recognize that we live in an extremely competitive academic environment. And to be highly competitive, you need to really plan and think about how to make your CV much better. And one of the most basic ways to do that is how you choose your MA and PhD program. I think that most people don't really reflect on a lot about how they should choose their PhD programs. Most of us rely on rankings, for example, which is a fairly okay way to look at which are the good universities, but they're not always a good measure of in which academic environment will you really thrive. So For example, in terms of rankings, most of the rankings, they often reflect teaching. But if you're aiming for a PhD program, you really don't want to be relying on teaching capacity of an institution. You want to know the research power of an institution. You want to know who the experts are. So maybe there's a different strategy that you need to think about when you enter a PhD program. And certainly when you think about who you work with, that also comes to be, it's also really important to think about the individual people you want to work with versus the institutional environment versus the department where they're located. So these things really matter in terms of how you plan yourself in order for you to be more competitive. It's been mentioned a while ago, finding the right mentor. How do you find the right mentor? Sometimes I think it's luck, sometimes it's building the relationship with that person. So I think that's pretty important to remember. Maybe you have a good, you may have a good relationship and then that deteriorates. So these are important things when you think about, how to build and maintain that relationship with your mentor. And finally, having run several calls for applicants recently in my project, one thing I realized is people really don't know how to choose the field of study. We often choose in terms of traditions, particularly in the social sciences. If you're a political scientist, you're often interested to study, democracy, regime types, political parties. But the world has changed, and the future where we're going create new challenges for society. And I think it's really important to think about topics where you could have a niche. So, it's not about reinventing the wheel, but it's really being able to tackle grand challenges in society and being able to engage in these kinds of debates in the long run. And being an expert in that field puts you in a really good position to create networks, to find new ways in which you could pursue your research career. So in terms of where I think sort of the details and the nuances about how you improve your career opportunities lie, I'm a believer of work ethics and skills as foundations. I really genuinely think that how you start your PhD matters a lot. And this doesn't mean, like if you've not chosen the right PhD program, you're not going to have better career opportunities in the future. You can always make up and compensate for what you were lacking from the previous experiences. But I think it's really important to think about, what kind of skills development programs you need, what kind of training do you need in order to improve your research skills. But more importantly, I remember my supervisor telling me, I asked for advice how to hire people. And she said, I don't really need a smart person. I just need someone with good work ethics. And I genuinely think that is more important, especially if you're working on big projects, because ultimately your deliverable is based on your ability to work under time pressure and under immense external pressure from different there's going to be a lot of constraints and a lot of pressures working in a time-bound project. And so your work ethics will come through and will shine, and that will be the basis of all the other things that you could achieve in the long run. So your work ethics and skills will allow you to improve your publication and scholarly status. And there are, of course, certain choices you need to make. Where do you want to publish? What types of publication matters? What kind of activities should you undertake? But these are all going to be building up from your work ethic and skill set. And then finally, I think networks and recognition, they kind of come off as an offshoot of your publications and your scholarly work. One of the things, though, that I would say that's really important, and one of the things I look for when I look for a postdoc, for example, is this person a self-starter? So like building a network means maybe you're interested in looking for money to sort of set up a workshop and then explicitly increase the reach of the project. So networks and recognitions are basically a way to showcase the current research that you're doing, but also it's a way to further expand your reach and be able to think about more career opportunities over the long term. I think what I I was listening also to the previous speaker, and so I added this slide. So I was asking myself, what would I look for if I'm in a position where I'm the research leader, I'm hiring people. So I'll give you the opposite perspective, because you're all applying for jobs and you think, okay, I'll apply. So what would I look for if I'm building a research team? So the first, as I said, is, to me, it's really important that, work ethics comes through. I genuinely think that people who are more output-oriented, self-starter, and who are very honest about what they're good at and what they're not good at are important basic foundations for a good researcher. And I genuinely think that, not showing up in meetings, if you do certain things that that make it really difficult for me to entrust you with the job, with the task in the project, the more that I'll be hesitant to help you and train you. So to me, work ethics really shines through as an important, very basic, very fundamental almost skill to have, or rather character. Because I work in a very diverse team setting, I do require people to be a lot more open-minded and broad, sort of a broad thinker. My project is interdisciplinary. We cut across political science, economics, sociology. We work in a very international setting. So that's quite important as an outlook of a person. I want people who are able to work in uncomfortable situations. If we have field work in Greece, I feel like I would be confident to send you to Greece in order for you to collect data in that particular setting. So this is quite important to also reflect on in terms of your ability to conduct research. And in particular, I think if you're applying for a postdoc or PhD in a project, it's really, really important to have a balance between what you want to achieve individually and what your deliverables are for the team. Most of the big grants in Europe are team efforts. So it's always it's always very hard to get this balance right. And you will always have this tension between the PhD student and the supervisor, between the postdoc and the team leader. But I think that it is indeed the onus of the student and the postdoc to really think about, what can I do in order to help the research leader? Because ultimately, the alternative or the other point of view here is the research leader is not giving you a lot of things to do because they just want you to do things. The person at the top is looking at he or she has an overview of the big project, the big picture, and he or she needs things to be done. And the reason why you're being delegated certain tasks is because he or she thinks you're capable of doing these things. So think of it also in those terms, that it's not always just about, oh, it's hard because he's giving me too much work, but it's a team effort. It's a team project. The success of the PI is the success of each team member. All the opportunities that go to the team leader can trickle down to the other members of the team. So the more successful your research team is, the better you are in pushing for your individual careers at the same time. For postdocs in particular, I always get emails people asking if they can work with me as a visiting fellow. So one of the criteria I always put out is, what does this person have that I don't have? Because I don't want a replica of myself. I want someone who can do new things with me. And so that means looking for complementarity as opposed to like looking at exactly the same skill set. So think about this when you approach someone, when you look at a project, think about the topic and then think, what do I have as a postdoc that could be interesting for the research leader? Because there's going to be some money in the project. And if they're interested with you, with your CV, they'll find a way to find money to help you and incorporate you into the research project. So I'm going to go very quickly with this because these are quite general, but I thought it might be good to think about what are the core tips that might be useful when you're applying for a fellowship in a grant. So the first is your CV. We all know that. But I think one thing I really want to highlight is lecturership isn't the end all and be all of academia. As I said, I've left 2 permanent positions to take fellowships, 1 or 2 year one-year fellowships even. And that's because my interest was to build a research career. I wanted to have, the time and the space to be able to build interesting research projects. So I took the risk in order for me to be able to build a big research project like what I have now. Of course, not everyone can make those choices because, again, as I said, it's really about your personal circumstances. But I think it's really just important to reflect on the, when you're faced with a new job opportunity, you have to go back to where you want to go, because the vision and the goal that you have is going to drive your decision. It's going to help you be at peace as well. When you're turning down opportunities, you're at peace with them because you know you're doing this for something else. So I think that's a really good thing to just remember when you're, making decisions about postdocs and lecturerships and thinking about research career generally. One of the most important element of a grant is your ability to show that you can lead, right? So first of all, when you're thinking of applying for a grant 2 to 3 years ahead, maybe you need to start thinking about the publication strategy. Maybe you want to think about, you need to show a record of your grant capture. So before I've obtained this 1.5 million euro grant, I only had, I was a member of another project, which is just 100,000. So having some record that you're successfully able to work in a team setting is really important because it shows that you're versatile as a researcher, and therefore you're ready to take the next step to become a research leader. And I don't know if in the context of European universities, they always have this yearly review. But I always think of yearly reviews as very short-sighted. So personally, I have 5-year plans. So, I know where I want to be in 5 years. I know what I want to do. I know which grants I want to apply for. So it's really important to look at the future and think about where you want to go in order for you to reflect on the choices you need to make in the present. For grants in particular, the most important aspect is the topic. I know it's hard to shift, right? Like if you're studying one thing, it's kind of hard to move away from that. But it's also really important to think about, even if you're working within the topic that's traditional, the question that you always ask as a grant reviewer is, how does this proposal, and the approach that it's taking, how is it going to change the way we think about the topic? If you're going to study climate change, what is it that you're doing that's going to change the way we look at climate change? So the question of how innovative a proposal is, what that simply means is, how are you looking at it differently such that it will have an effect in the way the literature and the body of knowledge will examine the same topic? So concretely, there are questions around, are you proposing something new in terms of conceptualization or in terms of operationalization, or are you introducing a new methodology from another discipline? So now it's very common to have this, for example, in political and social sciences, like they have like approaches coming from physics, from the natural sciences being introduced into the discipline. So these are quite interesting ways to think about innovation and novelty, but it's really important when you put together a proposal, not only, is the topic sexy, but if it's, if it's not sexy, then you need to think about, how to propose an approach that's really genuinely reflecting something new and innovative. In the last part of a research grant application is to demonstrate research management skills. So there are questions about what does a leadership skill look like, right, for a research grant. It differs, but I think one of the most basic question that I would ask when I'm looking at the CV is, how will this person handle the day-to-day management of the grant? So we always think of research grants as, oh, I have 5 years of just writing and reading or doing data collection. The reality is I spend 2 days out of 5 days in phone calls. And I also spend most of my time talking to different admin people, in order for the grant to function on a daily basis. So do you have those skills? The other thing is, can you delegate the tasks? Do you have a record showing that you're a team player? And so these are quite important things to reflect on and to showcase this in the grant application. For research fellowships, they're quite different from the research grant, because the grant is about putting together an idea, a research idea, and implementing it, right? For research fellowships, it's really more, to me, research fellowships, what they do is give you a time-bound space for you to be able to move forward with your career, either by writing a book, a set of articles, or, you know, like shifting your research field. So the most important question when you're applying, so I'm sitting in a selection committee now, and we're about to look at specific, you know, at fellowships. And one of the things I'm really going to look at is, why are you applying for this particular fellowship, this specific fellowship, at this specific point in your career? Meaning, what will the fellowship do to your professional life? So I want to know what your interest is, why you're applying for this fellowship, and what can we do to help you move forward with your career. The second is, why this specific fellowship? Why not apply for other types of grants, you know, or why not apply for a research grant or another scheme? Why specifically this particular fellowship? So that also means reflecting a little bit about what the fellowship scheme is about, what they really want to achieve, and then so you can align your application to the general objectives of the funder. Finally, what can we expect once you finish the fellowship? So most people don't really think about, you know, what happens after the fellowship. You don't actually write that in your application, but actually in the motivation letter that I wrote in both fellowships, I specifically said, this is what I want to get after the fellowship. And that, I think, was a very useful way to demonstrate the longevity, you know, the long-term view of you in terms of research planning, but also it gives you it gives the reviewer an idea of where you are now and how much gain can you have if we give you this time. If we give you a 1 year off from teaching, 1 year off from all the other admin work in the university, what can you deliver? So I think it's really just good to explicitly say this into your application. For social science, this is particularly important. What are you going to do in the fellowship? Are you going to write a book? Will you publish a couple of papers? Where are you going to publish them? Do you need data collection? If you need data collection, where will you get the funding? Will you apply for more money, etc.? And finally, and again, this goes back to reflecting on the fellowship scheme, what kind of networks will you get if you become a fellow in the academy? So every fellowship scheme has its own set of audience and own focus. And I think it's just really good to figure out how you're going to expand your network and how it's going to help you become a better researcher or improve your professional objectives, achieve your professional objectives in the medium term. So finally, I want to end by talking about some of the reflections on the challenges I had as an early career here, being based here in Europe during my early career days. So here, and I think in the US in particular, there is still the mentality of publish or perish. So that's really true. In the UK, where I did my PhD and I spent about 7 years of my career, my friends, we would always talk about and compare, you know, our strategies. And there are many ways to publish, you know. Do I do single authored papers? Do I do co-authorships? Am I going to publish a monograph at this point? Or should I do more collective projects like special issues and edited volumes? Do I go for a set of papers as opposed to being, you know, as opposed to participating in collective projects? So these are quite important decisions. Personally, what I did, because I wanted to get big research grants, I started with single authored, and then I quickly moved to setting up big projects like special issues, edited volumes. So then I could demonstrate research leadership. And then now that I'm 7-8 years from my PhD, now I'm writing a monograph, a single authored monograph. So every person would have to make a decision over the sequence of your publications, where you want to publish, what kind of publication you want to do. But I think it's really important to remember, particularly if you're interested in an international career, if you want to be noticed by fellowships, you know, by people from US and from the EU, they always look for publications as a starting point of conversation. So it's really important to demonstrate that you can deliver papers. Building the network, I think I've seen some questions about how you start building a network. Of course, we all start with conferences, and most of us hate doing that because it feels like we're selling ourselves. But the way I look at conferences and attending workshops and building networks is that it's a way for me to identify the people I really want to work with over the long period of time. And so if I know that there are a couple of people I really want to work with, I will then think about a good project that I will sell to them and go to them and say, okay, why don't we work together on this project? And particularly for mid-career and established academics, they are really looking for people who have enthusiasm to work on a new project, but who would be able to carry most of the work and be able to push for new ideas. And the role of the senior academic is to provide supervision and direction in the project. Because again, our roles change in the academic as we move up in the academic ladder. So I think thinking about networking as a means to promote, as a means of finding people you can work with over the years is a good way to kind of lessen the pressure of just going to the conference because I want to build a network. Finally, I think that skills deficit is really, I would say that comparing the people who have done the PhD now and what I did before, I could really see that there are quite big differences in terms of strengths and weaknesses. And one of the things is just, skills deficit. To me, one of the things that I knew I didn't have was quantitative skills. Most of my work is based on qualitative research methods. But what I did was to perfect that method. So I've decided, okay, if I'm only good at interviewing because I'm good at communications and talking to people, why don't I specialize in this? So now I've developed a methodology on how to interview political elites. And that's what I do. All my research is all about getting political elites to be interviewed. And that's a specific skill, right? And that's a skill that you can incorporate in grants and fellowships, and you can use that to develop. So think about what you have and what you don't have, and make a decision in terms of how you can improve or how you can specialize, because the methodological training will be very, very important, not only for your own career, but also in looking for partners in the medium and long term. For social scientists, because I know this is a mixed audience, I couldn't, and I say this to my PhD students, you really need to just write every day, because people think you can write the results at the end of a project. That's not how writing works. For political scientists in particular, writing is an art, but it's also a learnable skill. Meaning, if you keep writing, you improve, because that's the only way you can learn new words. That's the only way you can improve structure. And that's the only way you can find your own voice as a researcher. It's really important that people recognize your work, and part of our currency is the writing style. And you can only develop that by doing that over and over again, practicing over a long period. I'm going to end there, and I'm sure you have questions, but if you're interested in the project that we're doing, please follow us in GripArm email, and then we have the project website as well if you're interested. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Singh. And actually, I'm seeing a lot of questions coming in. So I'll start with this first one. So I think this is like something that early career researchers are facing quite a lot. So the question is that if I propose something new, so let's say new methodology, which I have never done it before, how I convince the reviewer to believe me that I can do it?
Yeah, so I think you need, so the way it always works is you need a track record, right? I would start by first of all saying what I can do, and then saying this is the skill set that I want to develop if I work with you. And I really genuinely think that that's a more honest way of approaching someone, because you don't want to set the expectations, right? That, oh, you said you could do this, then I'd just be annoyed that you can't do this, and then we can't do the paper. So I think you should just be honest about it, but also this is part of the communication. You have to be able to say, where is the area of help that you need, right? So if you tell me, I always sit down with my postdoc and ask, what can I do for you? And you need to tell me, I want to take this specific methods course. I want to go to this specific event because I think I can do this, this, and that. So think of it as a two-way communication. We're not expecting you to be able to do everything when you come in. But what I expect from you is at the end of that relationship, you're a better researcher. And so part of that, part of my responsibility as a research leader is to figure out what is good for you in terms of methodological training. If you want to shift research topics, this is also one thing that you should consider. You know, some methods are interesting to do in some research area. So, you know, it's and because this takes time anyway, you know, you're in a postdoc position for 1 or 2 years, there's enough time for you to develop that relationship, but also to develop a new skill in the process.
Yeah, kind of agree. I mean, being honest is actually very, very important. The next question, well, actually, you've talked a lot about issues with social scientists, but I believe also there are some, well, very common issue again, also with the basic scientists. So the question here is that, so my PhD training is heavily focused on basic science, but it seems like in Indonesia and also perhaps in Southeast Asia in general, applied science is more desirable by funders and the government. Any advice to make our research more impactful to the society?
Yeah, I could imagine, but I mean, we always have this discussion in the social sciences. It's harder for us to convince policymakers that our work is valuable. So if you're working on cancer research, you only have to say, we're going to do an experiment and they'll buy it. Whereas we have to tell them, what is the value of doing a focus group discussion in the community? So I think it's, you know, they're kind of the same problem. We all have to show the relevance of our work to society, because we're spending public money. In particular, at least where I work in the context of the EU and national funding agencies here, we are expected to you really think about value for money, not so much, you know, cost effectiveness, but really, how am I spending taxpayers' money? Because, you know, they're paying for our research. What is the value added if we get funded, you know? And I think that's just really good to do. And so I think the advice is, you may not be able to shift immediately to applied science, but maybe a career plan where you can gradually build some elements of applied science into your portfolio of skills would be useful, particularly if you want to get grants, because it's not very common unless you're based in like huge, well-funded, well-endowed universities like Oxford and Cambridge. There's not going to be much money for basic research. You know, like humanities has the same problem, right? Anthropology has the same problem, because it's really hard to kind of demonstrate policy relevance quite directly, quite immediately. I mean, I guess it depends on the topic, but generally it's much harder.
Yeah, agree. And I also think that approach would be very useful. I mean, just try to build in those some applied science elements in your own career. The next one, I think this is quite relevant because it synchronized a lot with what you talked earlier. I'm currently on a tenure track. My supervisor warned me very strongly about not pursuing a research fellowship route, though I was very tempted. What's the fallback plan if research fellows can't secure future grants or future research positions?
So I think at some point I was in the middle also, where I was doing 2 research fellowships. I went to Japan and then I went to Germany. And the problem, of course, with fellowships is that they're always time bound, right? Like, so 3 years, 2 years. So you do need to know that when you take a fellowship, that you will have to find a permanent job after. And of course, the good thing about a permanent job is you can apply at any point in your life, you know, to get a research grant. But actually, my experience is that's not how it works, because research grants prioritize research deliverables and research record. You know, you have to have a good record of doing research and management. So teaching barely counts in your CV. You know, you submit a 2-page CV to the ERC, and that needs to be a 2-page about what you've done research-wise and management. So the difficulty with a permanent job, again, I think is always that we do end up taking on more administrative roles, more teaching roles. So for you to even be able to write a research grant, you have to kind of find a way in your existing set of deliverables to the university, right? So not all universities would give you 3 months to just write a proposal. In the Netherlands, we do have, because we don't have as much funding as Germany in terms of national funding, there is a priority to apply for ERC grants. So for example, in my previous institution, you would be allowed to have 1 semester off in order to write a proposal and submit. So maybe part of that is when you get a research, a permanent position, is over some period of time you would want to negotiate so you can apply for a research grant. So take advantage of the fact that it's a permanent job and it's secured. And so find a way to negotiate and say, okay, maybe I'll teach more in this semester and then move it, and so that I can be released from responsibility so I can focus on 1 or 2 things. But I don't think departments would do that if you just want to publish a paper. I think this is also, so one of the things that you have to remember also is the reason why grants are attractive for institutions is because of the overhead costs. So in my case, there's a 25% overhead cost. So, if you get 1.5 million, you get 25%. If you get 2 million, you get 25%. So I think you have to think about where the institution's interest is so that they can help you achieve your personal research career or career goals.
Well, that's really a lot of overhead costs, by the way. But I
well, the
see,
EU universities live off from the ERC grants because of that.
I see.
They get like 300,000 just for hosting a project.
Oh wow! Well, that's really a lot. But I think also your tips were very useful. So before inviting also our previous speaker to join the discussion session, so I'll ask one last question specifically to you, Dr. Jojo. Have you ever caught yourself slack? How you keep yourself motivated and passionate with your work? And I sometimes deal with procrastination, and I know it's wrong.
So in my case, I've never had that feeling because I've always made choices that I really, I've made choices that I thought, that I really want to do. So so one of the things that I've really thought about, I've always reflected on is this research project going to help me? Does this research project, is this research project something that I'm really passionate about to do? And so you have to think about when you formulate your, because research grants, the advantage of a research grant is it's really up to you to decide, right? No one will tell you what to do. You can decide how to frame the project. You can write it the way you do. So I'd always make sure that it's something that I'm excited about. So just to give you a point, in the current project so my old work, I've focused more on Latin America. So I've done work on Brazil and Chile. And I have a lot of friends in Brazil, so I still want to do work on Brazil. So one of the things I did in my grant is incorporate Brazil and Japan into the project, because these are 2 places I've always enjoyed going. I have friends, I have a network. I want to build that long-term relationship with people in these countries. So I built a project where, I have these countries in my research. And so one of the net effect of that is whenever, whenever I feel like, I don't know, I'm not so happy with where I'm going, I just go back and say, okay, look, there's these 2 places that's so cool, and I want to go back to these places. And because I have a flexibility as a researcher as well on where to go, what to do with my time, then I incorporate that. And so that helps me get over or get through some of these difficulties as a researcher. So I know that it's not something, I know for people who work in the lab, this is not the same situation. But I think it's just really important to remind yourself why you're doing what you're doing. And that also gives you an idea why, if you're when something is very hard to do and something's not so fun anymore to do, then it's a good point and a good moment to reflect why you're doing that and whether you should keep doing it.
Thank you very much. I think that's actually very interesting. I mean, that you've never get into a Slack. I mean, but so that means you think a lot and you take risk and you choose what you really like. So I would like to also invite our previous speaker to join as well. So now I think we have three of us, all of us here. So the question from now, so feel free to cut in. I mean, either Dr. Dasan or Dr. Jojo, you can answer. There's another, question that I think came up twice. So I decided to pick that up. So it's not only about yourself, but it's also about the students. And sometimes there are like really poor performance students, or those who are not really motivated. So how to keep them motivated, or how to motivate them?
So do you mean if you're as a supervisor, how do you help
as a supervisor? Because like if you are a lecturer, I mean, if you are working in a university, so it's not only about yourself with your supervisor, but you yourself also need to supervise students. So if they are not really motivated, if they are not really passionate, so how you can motivate them?
I think one way could be to sort of like understand why they are feeling less motivated. I think once we understand these key drivers, then we can sort of like troubleshoot and sort of get them around these problems. So once we understand those problems, we can address them, have a chat with them, and introduce measures to keep them motivated. So there are a couple of ways to get motivated. One is, let's say, giving them a paper every day to read, giving them some new ideas to play with. I mean, it's not posing any expectations on them to come up with something new, but the idea is to keep them refreshed every day or maybe every week. The idea is not to get them to be too dwell on their own failures or their rejections or their any experimental failures for that matter, anything. The idea is to get them up and running to the next problem, related problems. And so the idea is to free from their original problem, give them another problem. And then you free them from the next problem and then give them another problem. That could be one way to do it.
Yeah, and that seems to be one of the good approaches.
Yes, sometimes I employ that for some of my interns, students whom I work with. So they find it pretty interesting because they take a break from the original problem. Yes, it works sometimes.
Like, I mean, try to understand them and then give them some different problems so that they can just come out from what they are stuck in.
Yeah, and something much easier as well. So yes.
I see. Thank you very much. Well, as we have a lot, so I'll move to the next one. I think this one. This one also seems to be quite interesting. So novelty is an attractive selling point on your grant proposal generally. So, but however, this also comes with risk of failure. So, how can an applicant communicate this smartly to the reviewer of the grant proposal?
Okay, so I'm gonna make two disclaimers. So first is I'm a single applicant to the ERC, which is it's not very often that you do that, which means that failure is almost intrinsic in an ERC application. So the success rate is about 8%. So meaning if they get 200 applications in one category, they'll fund 8% of that. So accepting that the success rate is very low also helps you think about, okay, let's manage the expectation. No matter how good the proposal is, sometimes there's just more proposals that they can fund. So I think taking that view would probably make it less to me. So to me, I would think that way because there's, particularly with the grants system here in Europe, you're really competing across Europe, you know, and there's just a lot of good researchers around here. So in that sense, I don't, so there's a two-stage process, particularly with the ERC. If I make it, we always say, if you make it in the first cut, you're fine. Like, you should be happy, because that means your proposal is in the top 20% in Europe. And that means the other things would be really, it's luck. So let's not take out the fact that there's luck involved in all of this. Someone has a topic that said, you know, so like in my case, when I applied for my grant back in 2018, no one knew what critical minerals were. And so like people were looking at, I really don't know if this is original, because what is a critical mineral? No one was talking about it. And then 2 years after the moment I got the grant, the US, the European Union started talking about critical minerals. So, you know, that's luck. Like, I was happy that someone probably in the panel, one of the 6 reviewers, thought actually there's something in this project. So I think failure should not be something that we, you know, it's part of the business. I have a senior professor back in my PhD days were saying, you know, you need to develop a thick skin, because the academic career is really built around failing, and then there's a moment of success. And that's true for publication, it's true for promotions. You know, there's so many things that's so hard to control, that you know, as the Japanese would say, if there's nothing else you can do, you know, let go of the things that you have no control of. And so to me, that's a very good way to think about grant applications and fellowships and promotions. I've learned to kind of let go of things, because like, well, what can you do, right? But there are things you can do, such as, you know, improving certain things. If you know you're struggling with mental health, then, you know, you can find ways to help yourself. But on things you cannot do anything, you know, let luck and fate decide on that. So in that sense, I would say, yeah, I'm quite lucky that I didn't have this, I didn't have to apply the second time for the ERC. But having said that, I've applied for Dutch grants and I've failed twice. So, you know, it's not the same project, but I still failed, you know, 2 attempts before I got this one. So it's just good to put it into context. But on the question of how do you communicate novelty? There is a language in the grant. Okay, I'm not gonna say that, you know, everyone can write it. In the Netherlands, there are consulting companies that are paid to look at grants and grant applications. So there's almost like a science behind how to formulate a grant proposal. So I'm not gonna lie and tell you, you know, everyone can write it, but I think that's really, really important to just think about. Part of, and I think you need to put yourself in the other side here. If I'm a reviewer, I'll be reviewing 200 things. So only the most memorable ones would stick in my mind. If you're reading 200 applications, to cut it down to 50, so 1/4, you know, 25%, you need to have an idea that's communicable. And so part of that process is making sure that the grant proposal is airtight, but also that you're able to communicate as clearly as possible what exactly is new. And I remember my experience writing this grant. A lot of people spent so much time on the literature review. I spent maybe a week on the literature review. But of course, part of that is because I've written something on the area, so I know a little bit about it. But the more effort, where most of my efforts fell into, or where I focused most, is formulating the plan in a way that's understandable to a non-political scientist. So the other thing you have to remember is you're not going to have 6 political scientists reading your grant. The whole point of a research grant that's innovative is that the idea is so clear and simple that a biologist, when he reads this, would say, he or she would read it and say, actually, that's a really good idea. I think that's a really good metric to you know, of innovation. Because a simple idea that's communicated directly, and you can, you know, articulate that in that way, it's as clear as water, basically. I mean, that's how I view grant application.
Thank you very much. Well, I think that that synchronized quite well with my experience as well. That like sometimes the proposals that you spend a lot of time writing it might not get the grant, but sometimes some proposal that you spend just like 2 or 3 weeks, but with good experience of yourself and also like you have good selling point, will get the grant. But
Yeah.
it's not only about the luck. I think another thing that you pointed out that I think is very important, and it's also very similar to what Dr. Dasan said, was the language, right? I mean, you need to communicate in the language that the one who will read you, I mean, the reviewers would be able to understand. So I will move to the next question. So how to survive in a publish or perish environment, but with a very tiny grant?
Well, I don't think all research need big grants. That's the starting point, right? In my field, political theory, they don't want to do data collection, they still survive. So I think, that's not necessarily a bad thing. I think it just really goes back to why you need a research grant. Like, why not apply? So I think there's that question. Why do you want to apply for 1.5 million, not 300,000 euros? I think it's a really good question to ask yourself. Why do I want 1.5 million? It's a lot of work. 300,000 is manageable, right? So it's not about your capacity, but it's about what do I want to get to? Where do I want to go? So if you can get 5 papers for 300,000 versus, how many papers you want to get for 1.5 million, you kind of need to think which one, what is it that resonates to you as a researcher? That's how I would look at that. But I think it also depends. I have friends in Hong Kong, for example, where they have a ranking system of journals, which is very, very different from the way we rank our journals. So part of that publish or perish culture is also understanding your institutional conditions, right? Like where you're located, what they want from you. In the Philippines, where I come from, academics are expected to do policy work. If you're a political scientist, you should be doing policy work. You should be advising government. So that is not necessarily an academic output, but it's an important output. It's an important role to play for people who are based in the national universities. So I think it's also one of those things. Like the publish or perish mentality in Europe is built in such a way that, it's built into the system because we have a system that allows us to have this time and space to be able to do research projects and then just be insulated from administrative and teaching responsibilities. The US system is totally different. You cannot be bought out the way we are in the European system. So if that's a system that works for you, then I think, it's worth looking at that. But if you're a person also who likes teaching, maybe the balance of a bit of research and teaching works better, as opposed to just doing research.
I see. Thank you very much. Maybe this one will be our last question, I guess. And I also see like people support that it's a good question. Any tips for someone in an institution where research culture is not very strong and end up doing a lot of teaching, admin, all those things instead, and no more time, it seems, to do research? Maybe, understanding people a lot, I may start with Dr. Dasan.
Well, I think this depends on how which institution the person comes from. So certain institutions may have different emphasis and they allow for certain funding mechanisms. So there are institutions that rely on industry funding, and usually they associate the associated KPIs involve papers as well. So automatically your emphasis will be on generating publications and to also generate collaborative interest or industrial partner interest as well. So it really depends. If the institution isn't having such mechanisms, I think automatically it places a sort of a fencing already, and the construct is such that teaching is going to be your main focus, and hence there's going to be probably less funding for buying consumables for research. So yes. So then, if you think research is very important to you, then perhaps it's not the right construct at the moment for the person. Yeah.
Anything to add, Dr. Singh?
No, I think it's true. If you want a research career, you need to be in a research-oriented institution. I think that there's no other way to do it because the incentive structures would be different. But if you are, of course, the question is, if you want to transition, how do you do the transition from being in a teaching-led university to a research-led university? I think this is where the importance of networks and collaborations can come in. You need to find good people with money, but you have to demonstrate capacity that you could deliver for them. And I think that's going to be a stepping stone to find something else. I have friends who have done this. So it's not an unusual situation, moving from teaching-led to more research-led careers. And I think you really, because research is the good thing about research careers is it's a very transparent system. It's a counting system, right? How many did you publish? How many grants do you have? It's a very brutal system because there's no way to hide it, but it also means you know what they're looking for. And to me, I prefer a system like that where I know where I stand, you know? So in that sense, you have a network, you attend workshops, you look for opportunities to publish, you look for collaborations. People with money always looks for collaborators. That's like, I always look for, even if I don't have money that's built into the grant, I'll find a way to find money if I find the project interesting. So that's also just to remind, postdocs in particular, if you have a really good idea, it's worth writing to the PI and say, I've got this idea, send a 2-page thesis of the project. And maybe you're going to get somewhere from there. But don't write an email asking for a meeting and then talk about it, because as you know, particularly with research grants like the ERC, we barely have time to sit down to do certain things within the grant. So you get an email, you don't know what to say. Like from the point of view of the PI, I'm like, oh, that's interesting, but then I don't have anything to hold on. And I'm not going to spend an hour talking to this person knowing I'm not going to get something at the end of it. So you start the conversation by sending something, send your CV, a 2-page CV, a 1-page project idea, and then start the conversation from there.
Thank you very much for adding that. And actually that links very well to our next session on next week about collaboration. Thank you very much, Dr. Jojo. And please join me, actually, thank you, 2 of our speakers. So they provided a lot of insightful tips for you to bring forward to manage your research career better. Thank you very much, Dr. Dasan and Dr. Jojo. Thank you.
Thank you.
So I also would like to introduce our next session, which will be on March 8th, the same time, at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, Bangkok time. It will be still within session number 2, competency skills, but it will be about collaboration. So you'll be hearing from Dr. Nisara Karun Utaisiri from National Center for Genetic Engineering and Biotechnology, or Biotech, Thailand, and also from Tareq Hassan, Digital Transformation Center, Vietnam, and Hong Kwan Nguyen from Institute for Circular Economy Development, or ICED, Vietnam National University. So this will be what you will be hearing next week. So there'll be a lot more for you to listen and for you to ask, for you to discuss more about collaboration. Also, please allow me to remind several things. Many of you asked about the slides and also about the videos. So the slides and videos will be sent to you via email later, maybe just after a couple of days. And if you have any questions, again, you can send to the email aseanbcg@nasda.or.th. And also, please do not forget to fill up our survey at the end of the session so that we can improve our curriculum. Thank you very much for joining us. And it's just like 5 o'clock sharp here in Thailand, in Bangkok. Thank you very much to the speakers, and also thank you for your participation. Goodbye. Have a
Thank
nice
you
day.
very much, Dr. Shilpa, Dr.
Thank you.
Kalidasan, and Dr. Jojo.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all.
Mabuhay.
See you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.